so frequently misread. Sorrow's army as a boundless force. So drop your burdens and your parcels of remorse. Every seed will one day just leave us. Use your time well, because it's loads of you unthrown. Today is today is falling away. We're not confined to ashes. We are the link, not the chain.
Hi, welcome everybody to today's Songwriting Mastery Talk. I'm Deanne Zacabrous from Songwriting Lessons Online, and today we're going to talk about how to design the ideal practice system for your songwriting with a very special guest, Mike Philippoff. Mike Philippoff is a leading expert in music practice strategies, best known for his innovative coaching on acclaimed YouTube channel, Practice Guitar Now. He's built a reputation for helping musicians conquer creative roadblocks and technical roadblocks through really precise, targeted practice strategies that aren't only kind of technical instructions, but also help you develop a way of thinking about your musical problems and your musical objectives that's much more insightful and probably certainly much more multi-layered than maybe I had learned to do when I was starting out. So I'm very excited that he's going to be here today. Hi, Mike. Thank you very much for coming.
Hi, Deanna. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to get a lot out of this. I know anyone who's watching is also going to get a lot out of it. Put your name down in the chat and tell us where you're from and what you're into. When we want to write songs and perform original material, we have a lot of different areas to be across. We've got writing a song, singing the song, playing the instrument, singing and playing at the same time. And any of those areas could divide into multiple different subsections. So for songwriting, there's all the things that relate to writing the words, and then there's all the things that relate to writing the music. You could spend, and all of those have their own subcategories. So we could, when it comes to the music, we could spend all our time thinking about how to write melody, or we could spend all our time if we're into production, looking at like minutely different kinds of bass drum sounds, or writing things from a rhythm perspective. So you could get really stuck in any one of those areas and find it difficult to make the headway you want to overall. So, and everyone comes to songwriting with a different set of skills. Some people might feel more confident singing than playing guitar. Other people might feel like writing words is something that comes relatively easily to them, but melodies are more challenging. A third person might love creating guitar parts and riffs, but find that singing feels really exposing. So not only are there multiple areas that we could choose to focus on and decisions to be made about how we're going to allocate our time best, it's also the case that at different times in our development, those best decisions might change in ways that might not be apparent. So sometimes what we need to address as a next step is fairly obvious, and sometimes it's not. If I'm a beginner on guitar and I want to be able to play songs on guitar, I am going to need to learn open chords and some strumming as a bare minimum. But after that, there's so many different things I could learn. Like after you've learned how to play chords on piano or guitar, it can be quite challenging to diagnose what element in your playing or singing is holding you back. And sometimes it can look like it's one thing, but it's actually a different skill that's in the way. Like it can feel like, oh, it's my memory of chords, but it's actually your rhythm. So it's really going to be hard for us to make the best possible use of the limited time most of us have available for our creative pursuits if we don't know how to use that time most wisely. And everyone watching this is going to be unique as where they are in those different skill sets, and your practice strategies and setup should be as well. So one of the things we're going to look into is how we know what it is we should prioritize and when it's time to switch to a focus to another area. We're going to look at whether there's a simple way that we can diagnose what our most important limiting factors are at different times and then work out how we can address those, how we can feel confident as time goes by that we are putting our time and effort into the things that are actually going to help us the most as writers and performers. And if we have managed to figure out our biggest obstacle at any particular time, how we know which activities to design for ourselves to address that obstacle. So that's a lot of material. But first of all, I wanted to ask you about the mindset that supports us the most in finding and fixing our limiting factors. And the reason I want to start with that is because it's quite common that we enjoy spending more time on the skills that we feel more confidence and more ease with, and less time on the things that we find awkward or annoying or that reveal our weaknesses to us. Because when you do something that you can't do very well, or you try and do it, it makes you feel kind of sucky. And that's, most of us have a certain level of resistance to that. So we've got to set ourselves up in order to feel like it's going to be bearable to scrutinize our weaker areas. And then on top of that, sometimes the practical remedies can feel really laborious. So to this day, the discipline that might be required of me to do the things that are going to help the areas of my musicianship that don't sound the way I want them is still a work in progress. So do you have mindset advice first for cultivating a different relationship with the skill areas that we lack before we even start to get into the practical solutions? Because when I see your content, it often seems like you're taking like a surgical delight in identifying any weakness in how you've played something or you from the past. And because you have now identified what the problem is and now you can fix it. Were you always this way in your attitude to your musicianship and progress? And can you help the rest of us get into the same frame of mind?
Yes, I can. That's a very good question. And the answer comes down to your core identity, just how you see yourself and what meaning you assign to, let's say, a weakness that you become aware of in your playing. And of course, your ability to overcome it. So I think two reasons why people may feel get down on themselves or feel like not very up to working on their weak areas. Number one is because they associate the weakness with them being somehow less of a person, less of a musician, or whatever the case is. And so because of that, it's not very motivating to then put in the work and shore up that weakness, because it just keeps reminding you of perceived deficiencies in who you are as a musician and a person. And the other thing could be, actually, let me talk more about the identity piece first. So having that identity is one way to look at things. The other way is to become excited knowing that you've just uncovered for yourself a little path that you can go down to become a higher level musician and become excited by that. And you change your identity from someone who feels bad about themselves to somebody who is constantly chipping away at the process of becoming better than you are. And if you just make that little paradigm shift and see yourself more of like Rocky in training, or the Karate Kid, when the kid was developing the skills to learn to fight better. That's how I always saw myself, saw the practicing process. That made even the boring parts feel very, very inspiring from the beginning. And I find that the more I can help my students acquire that attitude, the easier, or that mindset, the easier everything becomes. And the other thing that can hold people back, and this is a more practical thing, is just not having a skill set for knowing what to do with problems you become aware of. Because it's one thing to realize, okay, I got this deficiency in my timing, for example. Okay, let's say I want to improve it because I want to feel good about the process of becoming better and so on. And I want to make that identity shift. But then what do I do? How do I make it better? And that's a whole different tactical conversation where we have to talk about what specifically in your timing, for example, is off. What are we trying to improve, and then what are the different ways we can do that? But my point is, you can make a study of how do you improve your timing, for example, or chord changes or whatever it is, and develop a skill set that you can then pair with your identity, your improved identity, where you have this internal drive to get better. And then if you have the skill set to know what to do with the time you have, it becomes that much more encouraging. So that's, in a nutshell, how I think about this.
How do I come back? Oh, now.
Should be a button in the bottom somewhere with the. Well,
Now,
we see it
you,
now.
even not you, every time. How do I get you back? No, no. Amazing. There we are.
There we are.
Okay, I don't really know how that works, but yes, I think that question of identity is really interesting, and I think quite often something I would add to that is if we have an unexamined element of identity that's to do with perfectionism or being the best, then it becomes almost very difficult to look at one's weaknesses. So if there's an overinvestment in, if your identity shifts to I'm eternally progressing, then it's much easier to embrace kind of the close detailed examination of different zones of your proficiency. But if you have an investment in like I have to be perfect or I have to be the best, that can be very unhelpful and it can seriously hold you back. And there's something that Olympians describe, like Olympic athletes describe as the rule of thirds. If you're feeling great about what you're doing all the time, you're not spending enough time in the things that are going to help you most. And I thought that's really good because it suggests using one's emotions as a compass, but one that might be telling us something different than what we might think. So if we're like, la 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 la, this is great. Oh, I'm just like grooving on down here. Lovely, but don't live there all the time because you won't be getting the most out of the time that you're spending on your musicianship. So I quite liked that rule of thirds, using emotions as a compass, and but that does require also an identity shift to accomplish. Now, when it comes to evaluating our strengths and weaknesses, songwriters who want to perform their own material, they've got all these different interlocking skills they've got to acquire. There's the playing, the singing, the synchronizing of the playing and the singing, the synchronizing the left hand and the right hand, whether you're on guitar or the piano. Then there's the knowledge to acquire about different domains of songwriting and composition. And then there's practicing those different areas. Can you suggest any ways that a person might be able to evaluate where they're at across the different areas of songwriting? So more on the compositional knowledge and activities side than the playing side right now. So I suppose one of the things that we notice when we're doing an activity is whether we find it hard or not. Does it feel hard? But going beyond that, if something feels okay, then we can imagine that we're all good with it, but we might not actually be all good with it at all. So what are the limits to what we can diagnose ourselves, what we can do about those limits? What are some ways that a person could use to audit their skills that would make a big difference to how a song comes over?
Sure. Well, I think obviously having external perspective is ultimately the best because having a teacher or songwriting, somebody who specializes in helping people to learn songwriting like you do, Deanna, is going to be much more experienced to help a more novice songwriter to assess their skills. But if you don't have a teacher right now, or if it's just you for whatever reason, one simple thing you can do is to simply set creativity goals or challenges for yourself where you have certain skills and you try to use them to achieve a particular creative objective. For example, let's say you just learned how to change between a few chords. Well, can you combine them with your knowledge of rhythm to create a rhythmically interesting chord progression? And if you can't, then perhaps something is deficient in the skills you are either in the skills themselves or in the way you are trying to connect them. But setting micro goals in general is a good way to structure your practice time when you have limited practice time to work on skills and a lot of skills to refine. What I mean by micro goals are things that you can focus on in a given practice session. Let's say you have just 10, 15 minutes and you set a goal that you can either completely achieve in those 10, 15 minutes or make reasonable progress towards in those 10, 15 minutes. So for instance, you have some chords you practice changing between, and then you have a rhythm pattern. Well, what are the most how can you, in those 15 minutes, can you come up with at least 5 or 6 or 7 cool chord progressions or song ideas using the chords 4 or 5 chords you selected, and 3 or 4 rhythmic ideas. Can you do that? Maybe they're not the most ideal ones, but can you at least come up with the number of ideas to begin with? Writing for the trash can, as the saying goes. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. If you can, then you are you've achieved a micro goal for today. If you can't, then there's some deficiency that you have to then zero in and focus on. But for that, ideally, we're coming back to having external perspective from an expert to look at your playing and songwriting process and give you feedback, and more specifically, even new ideas to try that you haven't yet thought of is most helpful. What do you think about that, Deanna? Do you find that to be the case with people you've taught songwriting to? Deanna, you're muted.
So what I like the most about what you just said was the idea of micro goals, and specifically doing a certain number of iterations. So when I started writing songs, I had no concept that I really didn't have any benchmarks. I was like, either I liked it or I didn't like it. That was it. I had no better criteria to use. I couldn't really talk to you. If someone had said, how do you feel about the amount of contrast between the sections? Or how do you feel about, I'd have been like, oh, good question. So I really didn't have any of the benchmarks that I think are useful now. But if you make a certain number of iterations of a particular chord sequence, you're going to know which one you like the most. And I think that's the part that is creatively really helpful. Because if you just stumble upon something and you kind of like it, and you leave it at that first iteration, you don't find out what the other possibilities might have been with that material. And you don't feel as confident in the final result as if you know that you had like 7 possibilities and you like this one the most. There's just something about making the decisions at a greater level of detail that then feeds into your confidence. You know this was the best out of 7. It wasn't just like kind of the first sort of vaguely okay thing that came along. So the micro goals and the thinking about iterations, I think, is really, really helpful for any type of composition thing, whether it's a rhythm, a melody. If you know that you chose that above the rest, it is probably going to be a better choice. Otherwise, you wouldn't have preferred it. But also, you kind of know that you put the work in to find what was the best out of everything that was available to you then, and that does feed into how proud, how sort of fulfilled you feel in sharing that material afterwards. And I've definitely had experiences where there was maybe one line or one section of a song that I wasn't completely satisfied with that bit, and I didn't really know how to revisit it and fix it at the time. I didn't have strategies for that. Every time I played it, I'd kind of cringe a little bit, and that just takes away from the whole experience. So the micro goals and the iterations, I think, is really key, and it's not something that necessarily occurs to us. So, and it seems obvious when you point it out, but until somebody points it out, why would you know to do that? You wouldn't.
Exactly. And let me add something to what you were just saying, Deanna. If you went through the process of, let's say, 15 minutes, came up with 7 iterations of the chord progression or whatever, and you don't like any of them, sometimes simply by asking let's say you don't like any of them. So instead of just saying, oh, I suck, and getting all down on yourself, what if you simply asked, what is it that I don't like about any of them? Why don't I like these 7 things? And you go through and you kind of grade them negatively. You write down, okay, I don't like that the rhythm is too repetitive, or the rhythm is too strict, and then you think, okay, how might I turn this around? And what are the opposite of those things that I don't like that might help you to create then 7 more ideas that you wouldn't have created otherwise? So you can use the things you don't like to trigger thoughts and ideas for new ideas then that will be closer to what you do like. So just wanted to throw that in there based on what you were just saying, Deanna.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And whilst it's going to be impossible to transmit like a whole body of technical knowledge in a live stream, the principle of what you don't like and what you do like can fall into a relatively small number of kind of broader categories. So I think one thing that's very helpful with songwriting is the idea of contrast and continuity. So do I like this? Does this section have enough contrast with what came before? Quite often the things that we don't like can be to do with a lack of contrast. If we feel like we get bored with something. And once you've identified that I'm bored with this, then it's like, well, what is boring? Are the chords too much the same? And it's not always really easy to identify, because sometimes I had a song where I had lots and lots of chords, and I still felt it was somehow boring. And I realized it's because I was starting the vocal phrase on the same beat of the bar every single time. There's a kind of a monotony and a mechanicalness to the way the words were being delivered. So sometimes it's not like necessarily that easy to pinpoint. But once you start asking those types of questions, you are able to refine things to your taste in a much more detailed way. Even if you don't have a ton of knowledge or skill, you can still just by sort of being like Sherlock songs, you can start uncovering what it is you want the song to get to. And I'm sure this probably applies to the playing aspect as well. And I think one of the reasons it can feel like it's hard to diagnose what's going on or how we really feel about a compositional idea is because when you are trying to execute something, you don't have as much bandwidth available for analyzing. And so I think recording is really important, like workshop recording, where you are listening for specific things. And I think we often, tying back into the not wanting to feel like we suck point earlier, quite often we don't like to listen to recordings because they sound like they're out of time, or they're just not as slick as we think we want to sound, or they're really like not, it's like, it's like a bad photo. It's like, oh my God, I don't sound like that, do I? I don't look like that, do I? And of course you don't really look or sound like that because you don't spend your life walking, that's not how the world experiences you. But if you can get past that discomfort, but use those recordings and interrogate them for very specific things, like, am I bored by this? Or why am I bored by this? Does this have enough contrast for me? Does this feel like it's communicating something new? Psychologically, we have a thing called salience sort of sensitivity. And that means that once we've heard a certain thing, as it applies to music, once we've heard a certain thing a number of times, we stop noticing it. And that's why in music, we love to hear the same thing, but a bit different. So, if the shaker comes in the fourth time round, that's like triggered our salience network, has noticed that, released some nice chemicals, and our experience of enjoyment is really closely tied in on a neuroscience level to our experience of changeness and the sameness. So contrast and continuity is, for me, a very simple but useful question that we can, or theme that we can use to interrogate what we're up to, and recording is key. And my next question was going to be whether you had any suggestions for ways to diagnose what our limiting factors might be at different times in our development. But I definitely would, for me, it's recording and listening back and using questions. So I don't know if you have some other thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, recording is a big one for sure. And since I teach a lot of technique, guitar players who want to get better at the technical aspect of playing, recording is key for that, video and audio. The other thing is to maybe a little bit less applicable to songwriting, because you're only writing your music. But what I can actually, here's an idea. Listen to the music when you listen to the music that you like, that inspires you to then become a songwriter yourself. Make a list of everything you were just saying, Deanna, all the salience points that you like about the music that you like. How is the rhythm used? How's the melody used? How's the form structure? And all those things, and in combination from section to section, what are the things that you really like about the pieces of music that truly move you and truly inspire you? And then try to then compare, look at your music or the ideas that you're writing through that same lens. Not necessarily to try to make a apples to apples comparison, because it won't be, because again, you're not writing the exact same piece that somebody else wrote, but you're looking for the same points of musical excitement that you hear and that the music that you love makes you feel. You're looking to get those same feelings out of the music that you write. And whenever something is missing, or something that you consistently hear and feel from the musicians who inspire you that you don't feel in your music, that is a good clue that particular skill or that particular goal is something you don't quite yet have the chops, the songwriting abilities to execute. And then you can more specifically look for help from a teacher in area X, whatever that area X could be. So that's another good way you can pinpoint your weaknesses, I think.
Cool, thank you. Yes, I think And it also trains you out of feeling like songwriting is magical and that you're just going to come out with
Right.
it's going to come out perfectly formed the first time, which I think, and I really have quite a bee in my bonnet about this because it's so unhelpful as an idea. But if you think about the way that we culturally encounter songwriters as fans, so most of us don't grow up in musical families. We don't grow up seeing the work in progress, and we don't grow up understanding how an initial idea can get turned into a finished song. Most of us get into music. There might be artists we really love. We might go and see those artists. We buy their albums. We read the interviews. All of that would give us a set of assumptions around songwriting that it's mystical. This guy, he went off to, I'm thinking of a Scottish songwriter, went off on an island for 2 weeks to write the songs for the next album. Or this guy, it was about something mystical that happened in his past. And of course, magazines are meant to sell the artist. So of course, they're going to make it seem like it's a completely unique gift specific to this person that you cannot experience unless you buy this album and go to this gig. Like, of course, that's going to be how it's presented, but that's not how it is. So, and until we notice that for ourselves, I think we can be really held hostage by a lot of cultural assumptions that we just sort of absorbed when we were growing up and getting into music. They're actually sort of, when you really examine them, they were founded on pretty much nothing. So that wasn't a question. That's more just something I strongly think.
Yes, and let me add something to this. I think that's an excellent point. When we listen to songwriters or guitar players, musicians that we like, we just hear the finished product, and that's you mentioned that piece. And unless you have been around musicians and you've seen them go through the process from start to finish of writing a song, let's say, you have no idea just how many iterations and how many moments of trial and error and frustration they've gone through. It's easy to assume that, they just got a song idea and they wrote it from A to Z exactly as it appears on the record in like an hour or whatever. But it's not like that at all in most cases. And no, just simply realizing the fact that whatever frustrations you're going through, musicians you admire also go through maybe not necessarily the same level of frustrations, but they certainly aren't just cranking them out, can't think of a good analogy off the top of my head, but certainly not going from A to Z on the first try or anything. There's a lot of trial and error, a lot of thinking, a lot of variations, a lot of leaving things be until and then just kind of going on a walk or something to come back to it with a fresh set of ears and fresh eyes to think of new ideas and so on. And just simply realizing that, going back to the very first thing we talked about, of how to not get disheartened by discovering a weakness you need to work on, just realize that musicians you love, they've kind of embraced that process, whether they realize it or not, and they're going through it. And that is the path that everyone who ever becomes great at playing guitar or playing music or writing songs has to go through. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And also, aside from the fact that there's an incentive on the part of the PR machine to make each artist's performance and album and song and release seem unique and urgent, of course, that's a marketing imperative. They're not going to be like, oh, this is a new single from, Jason Derulo, and it uses chord progression number 4 from the Book of Common Chord Progressions, and it's got some trumpets in it. That's not going to make anyone desperate to hear the new single. So of course there's a kind of marketing incentive in making it seem magical, but added to that, even if that weren't the case, songwriters who've developed their own method and they've managed to make work often they're not going to have an academic way of explaining it. A lot of songwriters who've achieved great things in pop culture and who are very widely known, they haven't necessarily gone to music school, so they haven't necessarily they've just got the words that they've got to describe what they're doing, and that might or might not be a way of describing it that we can all understand. It might be a way that they might not have the means of putting it into kind of those buckets of like, well, I look at the rhythm this way and I write melodies this way. They might not just have those categories, might not exist in their own mind, but that doesn't mean that the categories don't exist and that we can't learn them. So that's I remember starting out in bands, and the idea that, you know, it was a bit like the magical songwriting fairy might kind of tap you on the shoulder or not. The idea that there was something that you were either great or you weren't. And that always really irritated me, and I didn't believe it. And it turned out not to be true. I was right. Anyway, so back onto something that I think lots of people will identify with. When, let's say we've got 5 songs and we're practicing for a spot in our local joint, and we are trying to figure out the best way to practice. So my approach to that historically used to be that I thought doing a good job of practicing meant running my set from beginning to end. I play the song, I play the next song, I play the next song, I finished. I've done some great practice. What might be the limitations of this kind of approach, and what might be better?
Sure. Great question. And actually, let me say that playing all the way from start to finish through a whole set list is not a bad approach. And the reason I say that is because when we play live, we never, or almost never, play as well as we do in our practice room. And going back to the first point that we talked about of the perfectionism and the fear of mistakes, and especially fear of letting other people hear us make mistakes when we perform, it is often very shocking for a lot of performers to realize just how badly they play relative to how good they thought they were, especially if they're relatively new to performing. And so the benefit, and I know you asked about the limitations, but I'll get to those. The benefit of the approach you described is the fact that you get to hear your playing, how it's more likely to be, warts and all, and you get to practice the process of playing through mistakes, not letting them trip you up, and continuing to just play as if the mistake didn't happen. It's almost like you're saying something and then like, oh, actually, I meant to say this, and then you just go to the next point, and nothing ever came of it. Nobody, starts throwing tomatoes at you because you messed up a line while you're speaking, and you realize that it's kind of like that when you're performing. So being able to play through mistakes is really, really important. Now, the limitation of that, though, is just like, let me back up for a second. See what I did there? I just started a thought, then I went back to a different train of thought. When you practice, you want to make a list, at least a mental list, of mistakes that happen most often, so that if you still have time between today and whenever the performance is, you can then zero in on the specific parts of the songs that give you the most trouble. So let's say you always mess up in the chorus section of one of the songs. Well, if you only wait to play through that chorus section of song number 3 of a 5-song set, and you only get to play it once in the course of, I don't know, if it's 3 times 5, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, if you only get to play it once, you only get to practice it, quote unquote, a handful of times before the performance day comes, and then you're very unlikely to play that part better. So as important as it is to play through mistakes and get comfortable and confident that the sky is not going to fall, you can still keep playing even if a mistake happens, it's also important to actually practice the things that give you the most trouble. And so when you're running through the full set list, you make a list, either an actual list or one in your mind. Okay, I make a mistake here, 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 and here, and I typically make these mistakes pretty consistently in those spots. Let's say on Monday, you play through the whole set list. On Tuesday, you can then just focus on the specific parts where you made mistakes. So you can identify, okay, what exactly is going wrong in those sections. Let's say you have some excessive muscle tension in your shoulders while you're strumming. Okay, so now you can practice that chorus section of song number 3 or whatever while focusing on relaxing the shoulder. And by only focusing on that one part, in the span of the same 15 minutes, you can maybe repeat it 500 times instead of just once. And by doing that, when you then get closer and closer to the gig, every time that chorus section comes up in your playthrough of either that one song or the whole playlist or whatever it is, you are way more likely to be more consistent with it because you're more relaxed. And when you fix more general or transferable skills or areas of your performance mechanism, let's say tension control is one example. When you learn to play with less body tension in song number one, you're going to be way more likely to be more relaxed in everything you play, which is going to have a cascading effect on your entire performance, most likely. So simply by zeroing in on a specific mistake and fixing it, let's say there's a chord change from G to C, let's say from open G major to open C major. If that gives you trouble in one song, by making it better and focusing on it, whenever that chord change comes up in any song you ever play, you're going to be better. And so that's going to improve your playing in that way as well. So the bottom line is you want to have more than one way to practice and to approach your weak areas. And those two are kind of broad categories. One is performance practice, where you try to imitate things that come up in a song, in a performance, mainly having to play a bunch of songs all the way through without stopping. And the other one where you zero in on a specific part that consistently gives you trouble, try to understand exactly what is going wrong there, fix it, and that then makes the full playthrough more confident and more comfortable. So in broad strokes, that's what I'd recommend there.
Yeah, I think I agree that there is value to running the whole set, because you want to prime yourself for the whole experience and for getting used to what song's coming after what song and all of this. I think the thing that I would pick out most on what you said was noticing where mistakes are happening on a regular basis, like where's there often the same mistake. And again, I think recording is really helpful for that, because sometimes we don't actually notice. Like sometimes we only notice the howlers.
Right.
And the other thing that I think is helpful, which I never knew to do this, when I was out and doing lots of gigs, is to audit your recordings for particular things. So how's the time? I was always astonished to find on recordings that I would think that I'd gone quieter and louder. I thought I had dynamic in my performance. And there really was like a tiny, almost imperceptible level of dynamic. So until you hear yourself back, you don't know. It can feel like you've made a big change, but it's only translating to a small amount. So I think those are things that you only really can get from listening to yourself back. But if you just listen to yourself back and try and decide in a blanket sense whether it's good or bad, that just ruins your confidence. It's not, you want to listen looking for specific things, I think. And then, as you say, working out, kind of going to fix those things sort of more forensically. So I guess zooming out and zooming in might be one way of this sort of thinking about it.
Yes. And let me go into a little more depth about that. So I know that there's this concept that I teach called focus rotation. And I typically teach it in the context of what you do while you're practicing. So you have, let's say, your guitar in your hands and you're practicing a difficult part of a song, and you rotate your focus between different areas of playing. Say it's the timing, say it's the cleanliness of the chord changes, say it's string noise or excess tension or something else. When you're listening back to a recording, you follow that same process, which is basically what you said, but I'm just going a little more detail there. You can have a list of elements that you want to be sure is a checklist that your recording checks off on. Like you said, it's in time. The dynamics are what they should be. The parts are clean, and the transitions from one to the next are smooth, and everything else that you need to make sure are accounted for. And when you listen through your recording more than once, so first time you listen through, you just listen to the timing. The second time, it is just dynamics. The third one is just transitions. And this way, you don't overwhelm yourself, as you said, Deanna. You don't overwhelm yourself because you're only focusing on one thing at a time. But by listening multiple times, you give yourself a chance to really go deep on the one element you are trying to make sure things are correct on. And the other thing that is really effective for preparation is to imitate the live performance conditions as best as you can, as realistically as you can. You may not be able to imitate a 100-person audience, but what you can do is find one or two people, ideally good musicians, if you can, and play for them. It is something else to play for one or two people who are as good as you, whose attention is 100% focused on you, even on Zoom or something like that. You don't have, even if they're not in your area, you could do this online for just a couple of friends or something. Play for them. You will be way more. It'll be way more similar to playing in front of a full audience in terms of the nerves you might feel, the mistakes that they're gonna be drawn out of you. It's a good experience if you can arrange that. The other thing you can do is make a list of things that happen on the stage. For instance, the obvious one is you're probably going to be standing up. You're not going to be sitting down, so play standing up. If you've got any stage performance moves, or if you're just simply walking around while you're playing, you practice that. If you are playing with a certain lighting, either a strobe light, if you're in a rock band or something, see if you can imitate that, or if you just want to play in the dark. Or what is the what is the temperature like? Is it hot and humid? Is it room temperature? Is it kind of cold? Imitate any of those conditions as best as you can, and practice in those conditions. Practice playing through the full set list and through the difficult parts under those conditions. And as you get more experience, your list of live performance situations to account for will grow, because you will simply have more experience, and what you're most likely to expect. And certainly some things you may or may not be able to replicate, but some you may. For example, if you've got multiple instruments, multiple guitars, you can practice playing each song on a different guitar, just to see if you can not let that throw you off, versus always playing on the guitar you're used to, and that sort of thing. So the more of these things you can account for while practicing, the less likely it's going to throw you off when it comes to performance.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And
Deanna, you're muted.
What about now? Can you hear me?
I hear you now. Yeah, yeah.
I think that's totally true. And I think one of the biggest components of that is how things sound. So if you're practicing singing and playing acoustic guitar at home, you're probably not plugged in, and you're experiencing your vocal like as it comes out and around the side. And it always sounds different when you're singing into a mic and you're hearing it back from the PA. And that might sound like a trivial difference, but it's enough to kind of like arrest a percentage of your attention that you've actually needed to play your songs correctly. So even if you just have something like this, where you're plugging your guitar or your voice into and you're listening through it to headphones, so you're not being super loud. You're just getting used to the quality of the signal sounding coming from to you in a different way. So I think that's something that freaks people out a lot. And I think also it takes a little while to get used to the fact that you're going to be 20% less capable as soon as there's other people in the room. So you need to build in a little bit of headroom. So if something goes right when you're at the very top of, when everything's good and you've warmed up and you're not stressed and you're at the very top of your capabilities, you're unlikely to be able to replicate those conditions live. And so a good way of seeing where you're at with how much skill room you've got to lose a bit on the day is playing things a bit faster and a bit slower. So if you've got a complicated guitar part, an easy way to check. I'm playing at a wedding at the weekend, and one of the songs is Mr. Brightside, and there's no keyboards, so the guitar's definitely got to nail that riff. So I'm just practicing it at different tempos. So I've got playing it faster, playing it slower, playing it right. So I've got, so that I know even if the drummer starts a little bit fast, I'm gonna be all right. So I mean, obviously that's I guess playing. If you've written a complicated part for your song, that might be something to do. So I'm really interested in this idea of focus rotation, and especially the sort of implication it might have for how we organize the way we think about the skills we want to develop. So if you had a whole bunch, we obviously want to get better at singing, we want to get better at guitar. There's going to be a bunch of creativity oriented activities and composing activities we might want to do. How do we figure out how much time to allocate, what order to allocate to them? How can we devise our own kind of practice routine over time that's going to look after all those areas? Is there a case for trying to do like 10 minutes each every day? Is there a case for trying to concentrate on one for a little while and then switch to the other, so that over the course of a month or a quarter or even a year, you've kind of invested a bunch of time into each thing, so at the end of that period of time you're like well up? Or what, do you have any kind of thoughts about that?
Yes.
And did that make the way I said it make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think it makes sense, and it's a big topic, but I'll do my best to explain it concisely. So the first thing you need is clarity on where your strengths and weaknesses are across the different skills. And if you don't have a teacher, which, as biased as I am, because I am a teacher myself, and because it's obviously going to go much faster and easier with having a teacher than not. But if you're doing it by yourself, what you can do is play. Let's say we're talking about practicing a song, and let's say that you've written, and getting clear on what skills you need to work on. Simply go through this focus rotation process over the course of 10, 15, 20 minutes. Play through the song, isolate the difficult section of the song. Say the song is 3 minutes and the most difficult section is 35 seconds long of the 3 minutes. And you rotate your focus between the different areas, like the ones you listed, Deanna. For instance, your vocals and how you are able to sync up your singing with the playing. Your timing of your playing, let's say, I'm using the guitar thing because, I'm a guitar player. The guitar or piano, whatever it is. Dynamic control, tension control in your body, all the elements that you even know to pay attention to. And then from there, you can do this across multiple songs that you are practicing, and you see if there are persistent areas that you struggle with a lot more than most. Let's say you struggle a lot with timing, and the other areas sometimes are good, sometimes they're okay, but like timing is a persistent issue from song to song. You always got to work on that. Well, in that case, and being that timing is a pretty fundamental skill, you kind of need to have it if you're going to perform. It would make sense for the time being to work on timing a little bit more than your other skills. So instead of working on all the skills for 10 minutes each or whatever, you work on timing for, let's say, 70 to 80% of your, it depends also on how much total practice time you have, but a good chunk of your practice time. So that it feels like you're really making some progress every time you're working on it for, let's say, 3 to 4 weeks to really shore up that weakness, so it becomes less of a limitation, and then reevaluate your skills again to see what's the next big bottleneck or the next big low-hanging fruit that if I improve it, it'll make me a better overall musician faster. And this also assumes that you don't have any performances or gigs or recording sessions coming up where you need a very specific hyper-focused skill set. What I mean by specific hyper-focused skill set is you got to perform those 4 songs as well as you can, but it doesn't really matter how well you can play other 97 songs that you know. So if you have a gig coming up, then you don't really need to worry about your general skills so much, or even focus rotation. You just need to focus on doing as good of a job as you can on those 4 songs, whatever it takes, and everything else can just kind of sit and wait. Then when the gig is over, then you have some breathing room and you don't have any pressure coming up, excuse me, where you have to focus on just delivering a specific set of songs. You can then get back to the focus rotation area, focus rotation practicing. And if you are doing this analysis and you don't have a particular skill that seems to be lagging way behind the others, then it might make sense to just focus on one area at a time for a few minutes so that they all come up equally. So in a nutshell, I think that's how I would
Yeah, I think making distinction between what's happening. So obviously, if you've got a gig or a session, then those things got to happen. Nothing else matters for that day apart from those things.
Right.
And so you might not always have the luxury of just taking a sort of meta-analysis of your skills and what to do. I have come to adopt a Schlieffen plan style approach, which is actually quite similar to I think what you've said in spirit. Alfred von Schlieffen was the German chancellor in World War One, And instead of, they had the Eastern Front, they had Russia, and they had the Western Front. Instead of dividing their armies 50-50, he put most of them on one end and most of them on, and a little, like, it was more like 70-30, 80-20. Can't remember which was which. Maybe it was mostly on the West and just like a holding line on the East. Can't remember. But the point is, it wasn't 50-50. There was enough to make actual momentum in one area whilst keeping the others stable. And so I think that's, in a way, that the example that you gave with working on doing a lot of work on timing, keep everything else stable, is sort of fits in with that. And so if I've got the luxury where I can decide freely what it is I want to work on at any given period of time, there typically will be one thing that I want to get a bit more momentum with and cover a bit more ground. And then the other things I'll just be doing enough to keep them ticking over. And because life's not perfect and we don't have all day to unfortunately sit around and play guitar or stand around and play guitar.
Exactly.
So yes. Now let's imagine, well, first of all, this is all extremely helpful. And I'm sure that people will be having some light bulb moments relative to how they've been doing things, or that this will have added some layers to how they're thinking about they're trying to do. And it does seem like partly what we're talking about is a learning curve of observation. So observing in a zoomed out way what it is that we want to create or play, observing in a really where we're at right now and where the sort of differences and correlations are, then looking in a more detailed way at how we can break down the elements. Would you agree with that? And do you have any advice for anyone listening who might have come to music as a really delightful, expressive activity, and who might find this sort of very analytical way that we're discussing it a little bit alien as an approach?
Yeah, actually, can you repeat your very first question, the first part of your question?
Yeah. So first of all, would you? It seems like part of what we're discussing with this is that there's a learning curve of observation.
Oh yes.
Get better and better at observing, both in a zoomed out way, identifying what it is we want to do, and then in a kind of zoomed in way, like, oh, actually the transition in that particular song is always a bit unstable or a bit unsteady. And why is that? Is it the chord? Is it the strumming? Is it,
Right.
Does that kind of correspond with how you see it, that those two levels of observation?
Exactly.
And then the second part of the question was, some of us don't come to music from a sort of academic perspective. We pick up guitar at home, we're self-taught, and this kind of way of thinking about it might not sound to us like what we thought we wanted to get out of playing guitar. Is there something that we could say to the people who might feel like this is kind of alien as an approach?
Yes.
To give a different perspective.
Yes. I'll try to answer both of those. So the zooming in and zooming out approach is exactly how I think of practicing. It's sort of like having a microscope, and you're always doing the zooming in and the zooming out. The zooming, and that helps a lot with focusing your attention, because we are only able to focus really on one thing at a time. Despite what social media teaches us, we're not really born multitaskers, and so that it's a muscle that you train through doing more repetitions, and also ideally, by the way, by repetitions I mean repetitions of practicing, and ideally by getting a lot of feedback from an expert. And when I keep saying this feedback from an expert thing, and what happens after you do this enough, the practicing, I mean, you start to become an expert, where you can trust your own opinion more and more by giving yourself feedback on what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're noticing from recordings, and so on. At first, you are not an expert, which is why getting feedback from someone who is an expert is good, because you just need feedback. That is the point. You just want reliable feedback you can act upon. And as you get better, you become more and more of an expert yourself, so you can trust your own feedback. So that's how that works. As far as advice from somebody who's thinking about music as more of a creative, artistic thing, and might be disappointed by the whole analytical approach to it, I find that the analytical approach actually helps to get the challenges out of the way most quickly, because the beautiful thing about practicing is it is in a lot of ways very black and white. I mean, there are some things that require some trial and error, but it's intelligent trial and error. Mostly it's things, okay, this is clearly the most efficient or the most effective path to practicing whatever you're practicing, so that you can get to the level you want to be most quickly, and then have more time to enjoy the creative and artistic side of performing, or just simply writing songs that you then have greater ability to play. And you don't need to spend any more time practicing than you need to. So if you already have the chops to play whatever you want to play, and you are writing music that you're comfortable playing and performing, then wonderful. Then you've already done your duty as far as that goes, as far as practicing goes. And there's only so much practicing you really need to do. On the other hand, if you always find yourself, or often find yourself writing music that you struggle to play, then my advice would be, again, to make that identity change and learn to love the process of practicing as something that enables you then to bridge the gap from where you are to where you get to do the fun, expressive, and artistic side more quickly. And simply changing the meaning you give to the activity of practicing, as opposed to being something that is tedious and not as artistic, reframe that to be something that's like a vehicle that allows you to get to the artistic side most quickly. I find that to be a more liberating mindset to have.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree, but then I would. But my take on that particular matter is that what we've been talking about is different ways of interrogating what your current situation is, what you ideally want to be able to do, what the nature of that gap might be at different times. And an interrogation is a question, it's an inquiry. And I think questions are some of the most useful creativity boosting elements that we have. You know, even if you say, what else does this chorus need? Or as soon as there's kind of research in neuroscience that shows your neurons basically start kind of like reaching out to one another. When you ask a question, it's like they start doing that and they grow new bits. That's not the, don't tell me in the comments, that's not how it goes. That was a layperson's paraphrasing. But essentially, different things happen to you neurologically if you adopt an exploratory mindset than if different things become available to you. And the biggest question of all is, what do I think is available to me as a musician and writer? And so I think that if we can use all types of questions, the kind of bigger open ones, and like, what is available to me, what do I want to express, what do I want to experience, what do I want to communicate, and the more kind of closed in, what's wrong with this little bit here, what happens if I do this here, that they're all ways of experiencing our own creativity in a far more vast fashion. So that would be my answer to anyone who finds this kind of analysis to be alien or not what they thought they might want out of music.
Yeah.
Anyway, there is a lot to think about there. It's a very big topic, but I'm sure that people are going to get a lot out of the things that you've shared. You also have something else for people.
Yes.
I'm going to put up on the screen just now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very good. Thank you. So this is a masterclass on the topic of effective practicing. These are very simple things and mindsets you can adapt into your practice routine, new practice habits that help you improve faster without needing to practice more or really develop any new skills. In fact, these accelerators will help you develop the skills you want to play the music you're trying to play much faster, much more easily, and again, without having to spend more time and effort doing it. So this is completely free. It's on my website. You can check it out at the link here on the screen and enjoy.
Well, that looks great. I urge everyone to download it. I have had the good fortune to participate in some of Mike's classes and coaching, and it really changed my attitude towards what I was trying to do in a way that fed into everything that I do, regardless whether it's singing or writing. So I would definitely urge everyone to download that. I also have this. This is my top 5 tips for writing lyrics. All the things that I wished I'd known when I started out, how to get started if you don't have any ideas, how to think about, how to evaluate your lyric draft. So on the question that we discussed earlier today about how do you pinpoint what's working and what's not working, how do you get a higher quality response for yourself other than I like it or I don't like it. It's got some ideas in there that are quite simple but quite powerful in terms of just looking at the words you've got, the drafts you've got, and seeing what you think is working and why that is. It's got ways that you can analyze the music that you really like or the lyrics that you really like and see what characteristics you might want to bring into your own writing. So there are those 2 there, and I will put the links up. I'm going to put Mike's QR code up again in case anyone didn't get that. Just leave that, and I'll put this up at the end as well, so you'll be able to grab that, and the link will be below. Thank you very much, Mike. That's always completely fascinating, and I'm always feel like I get this. It's like having my own personal coaching session with all my most burning questions answered. So that's a good fortune for me. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Deanna.